Try again a little later. Okay, we're there. I'm wearing a t-shirt this morning that says adopted. And Lane came in this morning and says, I didn't know you were adopted. And I said, well, I'm adopted by my Abba Father. And, but it's one of the t-shirts that Fathers in the Field gives out. And today is a special day because today we are launching a new ministry in our church. Oh, by the way, children can be dismissed to children's church. We're launching a new ministry in our church where we're partnering with Fathers in the Field. And it is a ministry that targets fatherless boys to try to bring them into loving relationships, to introduce them to the Lord and to the church. And it's such an important ministry. And unfortunately, we live in a society today where the church has kind of abrogated its responsibility there. Our government supplies so many of the needs for fathers and widows, and somehow many churches don't see the necessity and really get involved. At ICC, we have served widows and orphans, but not on a real consistent basis. And I'll just give examples of ministry that we have done. Over the years, we have used the Angel Tree program for those that are incarcerated in jail, and they need somebody to help out with their children, and we provided gifts over the years for a lot of children. Unfortunately, that ministry has stopped at the jail, and I don't know why, but it didn't happen this last year. But that was a ministry I started when I was the chaplain there. We have given benevolently to needs in our community. Many of them were either widows or single moms where they couldn't pay utility bills or needed food or things like that that impacted children. We've also hosted through CEF Good News Clubs, party clubs, adventure clubs, 5-day clubs, where we reach out into the community, and a lot of the children who come in are fatherless. They're from single parent or no parent homes. We also have LI. We have the clothes closet that provides free clothing for people in our community that are poor, and many of those are single moms that need clothing for their children. So we do things here locally. We also support one of our main missionaries is Tears, and I'm going to talk about them later in the Dominican Republic. And so overall, we're doing fair. And if I was to give us a score, it would probably be about a 6. And here's why. Most of our ministry to widows and orphans is passive. We give our money, and that's all we do. We don't really invest in them. And that's why I feel like this is such an important ministry that makes us become more involved. Because the Bible has a lot to say about ministering to the widows and orphans. In the Old Testament, where most of the passages are, interestingly, it is like so much of the law. And if you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount and different passages in the New Testament, we're no longer under the law, but we're called to a higher law than the law in the Old Testament. The Old Testament law was mostly don't do this. And as we look at the passage, and I'm going to look at 3 passages that kind of exemplify this in the Old Testament that talks about how we are to minister to widows and orphans. And they're mostly don't do this. Let me look at those passages. The first one's in Exodus. You must not exploit a widow or an orphan. In other words, don't take advantage of widows and orphans. The second one is in Deuteronomy chapter 14, which is cloaked in with some other stuff. And it says, give to the Levites who receive no allotment of land among you, as well as foreigners living among you, the orphans, and the widows in your towns, so that they can eat and be satisfied. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all your work. In other words, to provide food and shelter for widows and orphans. That's a responsibility that the Old Testament law tells us about. And last of all is the verse that is the key verse of Fathers in the Fields that you'll see. Defend the cause of the orphans and fight for the rights of widows. And so from these verses, we get one of the major themes of how we are to minister to widows and orphans. And we can see this with three principles that apply to us as citizens of heaven, but also just citizens of the world. First of all, we're never to take advantage of widows and orphans. That's something that they're easy prey. And unfortunately, it happens a lot, even in our society. You hear about all the scams that happen to widows on the phone, and different ones that steal their inheritance and their savings and all that. So we're never to exploit or take advantage of them. Second, as I've already mentioned this, we are to provide financial assistance to make sure widows and orphans have shelter and food. Again, the government does a lot of that, but as we know, there are still a lot of gaps out there. People living in their cars, and in Durango, there are, when they dismantled Purple Cliffs, do you know there was a school bus that picked up a busload of kids from Purple Cliffs every day to go to school? It's a major issue. And we are to help with those needs. And then last of all, and this is the last verse, we are to make sure widows and orphans receive justice. We are to defend them because they can get exploited in the court system and the government system, and to help them to make sure they're treated fairly. So we need to continue to fight for these things, for widows and orphans, and make sure they're taken care of. And again, throughout history, there are so many numerous occasions and situations where they have been exploited. And, a lot of the books that were written in the 1800s talked about in the industrial age of all the orphans that were working in factories and on the streets. And, it's just something that throughout history, that hasn't been the case where they were taken care of. And even today, there are many cases where there's injustice. And I'm going to give one example that we help to support. Our Tears ministry in the Dominican Republic that we've supported for about 25 years is a ministry where Rod and Twila Davis went to the Dominican Republic from Washington State to minister to the poor and needy in the Dominican Republic. And when they started out, they were so poor and didn't have support that the people actually protected them and gave them shelter and food to eat. They were so bad off down there with their family, they took their 2 children and planted themselves in a barrio, a slum. But they eventually got their feet under them, and one of the great needs they saw was all these children who couldn't go to school. And they couldn't go to school because they didn't have legal birth certificates. In order to have a legal birth certificate, you have to have a father and a mother sign it. And if they didn't have that, they could not attend schools. So these children were growing up without any education and ended up either drug dealers in crime or prostitutes, and it was just, and so they started a school. And over the last probably 30 years, they have given an education to hundreds and thousands of children. They have about 300 children enrolled in the school now. And many of these would not get an education in the Dominican Republic. We help provide a meal a day for them when they're in school as a church. But that's a ministry that is tackling this on that educational side of things. And I praise the Lord for Rod and Twila. Rod was here a few years ago and spoke to us, and I need to make a trip. We need to set up a time to go to the Dominican Republic. I haven't been there but once, and that was about 17 years ago or so, and I need to get down there and see my dear friend and missionary. So why is there an emphasis in the Bible on ministering to the widows and orphans? Why is that such a big deal? Because they are special to God. Look at what the psalmist says about God. He is a father to the fatherless, defender of widows. This is God, whose dwelling is holy. God is a fatherless to those who don't have fathers. He takes special interest to them. And as his children, what God takes special interest in, guess what we're supposed to do? Take special interest in. This should be a priority for the church in doing this. And I think it's more than just what the Old Testament tells us to do. It's interesting, there's only one verse in the New Testament that specifically targets widows and orphans. But it's a very important verse, and I want to build on that today. And it's found in James 1:27. Look what he says. Pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for widows and orphans in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. Pure and genuine religion. This is what it looks like practically in the world. Taking care of the orphans and widows. As we've been teaching through the book of Isaiah, this is a major theme about living godly lives in the world. And if you look at chapter 1, leading up to that passage where we're to take care of the widows and orphans, we looked at this when we started Isaiah, but I want to remind us of what impure, unholy religion that God doesn't accept looks like. Look at what he says in Isaiah. Listen to the Lord, your leaders, you leaders of Sodom. Listen to the law of God, people of Gomorrah. By the way, he is talking about Judah here and the religious leaders and the people of Judah. What makes you think I want all your sacrifices, says the Lord? I'm sick of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of your fattened cattle. I have no pleasure from the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to worship me, who asked you to parade through my courts with all your ceremony? Stop bringing me your meaningless gifts. The incense of your offerings disgust me. As for your celebrations of the new moon and the Sabbath and your special days for fasting, they are all sinful and false. I want no more of your pious meetings. I hate your new moon celebrations and your annual festivals. They are a burden to me. I can't stand them. When you lift up your hands in prayer, I will not look. Though you offer many prayers, I will not listen. And here is the why of all of it. For your hands are covered with the blood of innocent victims. You see, God condemns religious practice. By the way, all of these things that are listed in this passage were required by the law. The new moon festivals, the Sabbaths, the offerings, the incense, all of that was required by the law in relationship to God and was part of their religion. But God condemns it because their hearts were evil and cruel. You see, unless a heart is right, then religious practice means nothing. And he goes on and says this in the next two verses, which ends with where we want to look at today. In verse 16 and 17. Wash yourselves and be clean. Get your sins out of my sight. Give up your evil ways. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Help the oppressed. Defend the cause of the orphans. Fight for the rights of the widows. Which again is the verse where we want to emphasize today. You see, an inward change of heart, by the way, which is only accomplished through God's saving grace. We don't do it. But when that takes place, it changes our outward actions. And it changes us from being selfish egotistical, all about me lives, to seeing others and seeing their needs and acting upon those needs. That's what we're looking at. And that's what James is talking about. And I want to go back to that passage of what pure and genuine religion is. In the sight of God, it means caring for widows and orphans in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. You see in this verse, as we look at it, James is challenging us to go beyond just caring for the widows and orphans' needs out there. How is God addressed here? Who is he called? God the Father. See, that's a family image. We are all adopted in the family of God when we become Christians. We are children of God. And see, as children of God, what we are primarily supposed to be doing is going out there and inviting others to become children of God. And one of the ways we can do that is to go to those who do not have that father image in their home and help not fill the gap, but at least provide that godly male image in their lives. And it must be intentional. And that's what the concept of Fathers in the Field is all about. It is helping to bring fatherless boys into relationship with a godly Christian man who can mentor them and bring them into the family of God. And that's what it's all about. And I want to ask Michael to come forward now. Michael is our missionary with Fathers in the Field that's going to be doing a presentation after the service as we kick this off. And I want him to just share a little bit, just a tidbit of what Fathers in the Field is about. He's going to share more in depth after the service, but I want him to share that. So you'll come over here in front of the camera.
Oh, I'm being recorded. I'm being recorded, okay. All right, I appreciate it. Can you all hear me? Excellent. So yes, I am Mike Brechenteal. I am your regional missionary for Fathers in the Field. I do this from Denver to El Paso and also New York State. Don't ask me how that happened. It's very strange. I've been to the Bronx now, and I've never done that in my life, and I love it. But let me ask a question. Why does God pair the fatherless and the widow together? Pastor touched on it, right? That's rhetorical, but he touched on it in that God has a special heart for them. But there's an additional piece to it. There's a vulnerability that the widows and the orphans share. So let me share briefly a story. I used to be a paramedic in the Denver area. And when I would run these 911 calls, and I'd run a pediatric call, one, when you hear over the radio that you're running on a 6-year-old, you get more nervous, right, than a 40-year-old man, right? A man, me, right? And one night, I was working nights, and I was in a bad part of town, and I get a call for a 6-year-old boy not breathing. And that immediately makes you be like, oh, man. And when we get to this apartment, at the door, we are met by an elderly Russian grandmother who is screaming at us in Russian. I don't know Russian. And we have no idea what's going on. She leads us into the living room, and there's a 6-year-old boy who is hardly breathing, unconscious. And the neighbors come out, and we get a little bit of interpretation happen. Come to find out, this little boy has type 1 diabetes. And when his blood sugar started getting low, the grandmother had no idea what to do. But she knew, like, oh yes, he has this medicine, this auto-injector, and started darting him over and over and over with this medicine. And for those of you that are not familiar with diabetes, it is basically, you have to have sugar in your blood for your brain even to operate. And that medicine was actually furthering the problem. They were using it at the wrong time in the wrong way, so she was making it worse and worse and worse. And we took care of the boy, but we came to find out that this boy, like so many others, when I would run on these pediatric 911 calls, almost every time, it's not just a medical call, it's not just a trauma call, it's a family problem call. And almost every single time, it is that there is no man in the home. Almost every time. And that was the case that night. And came to find out that mom, I was with the grandmother. It was the mom. She'd been out on a 2-week bender yet again. And she just dumped her son on her own mother, the grandmother, and without any instruction of even how to take care of him. And I bring this back to my question of what makes them vulnerable. It is the absence of the man that is supposed to be the pastor, provider, and protector of their household. So that mom was the widow of our day. We have widows just like there's always been throughout time, but these single moms are the widows of our day as well. And this boy as well, he was vulnerable because he did not have his father. So the exact same things that so often happen in biblical times, when there was not that man there in that household, it left them vulnerable. And so many times, these women would resort to things that they would never have believed they would in the past. And they would resort to prostitution to be able to take care of the needs. And that is the same thing so often today. It does not change for so many. And not every story is that same, but that is the reason they're vulnerable, because they do not have that man who should be the pastor, provider, and protector of their household. So that is one of the reasons that this ministry of Fathers in the Field exists. We are a national, intentional, one-on-one mentoring ministry to fatherless boys to reach them with the gospel. And I am so thankful for you guys and your pastor, Randall. I called him and immediately was willing to meet with me. The sad truth is, just like he talked about a little bit, the American church so often is so apathetic to the needs of those around us. And so many times I have pastors say, no, I don't even care. I'm not going to meet with you. He instead, he had me over to his house and had coffee. And my son was with me and we had coffee with him. And I got to share with him and with Jared about the ministry. So I am so thankful for your pastor, your leadership of your church, that you're following after God's heart and obeying his commands to care for the fatherless. And thank you for allowing me to serve you in this and help you do that. Because this ministry, this is your ministry now. This is not my ministry. My ministry is to you. We are a church equipping ministry. This mentoring ministry is yours. What I do then, I said, my ministry is to you. I provide you all the training and the resources, the materials, so you can carry this ministry out. So, and you already have a leadership team. Can you all raise your hands so people can see this? I've already spent a bit of time with all of these people, and they're going to help lead your church in this ministry. And I'm so thankful for all of you as well. So I will share with you more about the ministry, how it works, the commitments that men would make, and so that you can make an informed decision whether you would like to be a mentor father to, and that's the term we use, we call them mentor fathers, to a fatherless boy. So as a mentor father then, you would basically be sharing your life with a boy. You look at the example of discipleship that Jesus had. He taught and he taught and he taught, but he also spent his life with others. He shared his life with others, and that is what we're asking you to do with a fatherless boy. So you will be sharing the gospel and more truth from God's word. You'll be sharing your church family with him, and you'll be sharing your hobbies and your passions with him. You get to have fun with a fatherless boy. Whatever your hobby is, whether it's hunting and fishing, whether it's golf, repairing motorcycles, whatever it is, that is things you get to do with a fatherless boy. So come here after service. I'll go into much greater detail what this entails. And understand this is not just for the men to come here. Wives, you need to hear what your husband should be considering. And we also need other people to be a part of this leadership team as well. We need more ladies as well. So, because we only have one right now, and there's certain tasks that we need help with to support this ministry that women are very particularly good at. So thank you for hearing me out, and I look forward to talking to you some more.
That's just a tidbit, and just so you know, I promised several people I would be a little short today so we could have lunch. We'll see how that works, and if we start getting too long, you could start doing this, you know. Randall, but the point is this. As we look at this ministry of pure and genuine religion, it is ministering to the vulnerable, the needy, those that society cast aside. And I want to talk about that some more. I love the NIV translation of the first part of this verse, and I want to use it to emphasize what we're looking at. In the NIV, it says this: religion that our Father accepts. Religion that our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. So again, what we look at is this is an outward show of an inward work in the heart. This is not a complete definition of religion. And I want to put a warning out there, because there are those that have defined religion as just this. And a lot of mainstream denominations became social avenues, and they left the sin and the gospel and the Bible out, and they have gone astray, and they have died, and they lost the backbone of why this works. And so I want to challenge us that Christianity is much more than this. But this is the outward expression of Christianity. And James is saying that here in this verse, and he goes on and says more and outlines it further in the next chapter of the Bible. And look at what he says in James 2:14 through 20. He said, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, you say, 'Goodbye and have a good day. Stay warm and eat well.' But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do?" So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God? Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? And see, that's the bigger story of this. The good deeds is reaching out and ministering to those in need. And it shows that we really have had a change of heart. That we look at the world and we see the needy. We see those that are exploited. We see the homeless. We see the injustice. We see the fatherless boy. And we act upon that with something in our lives. So as we look at a ministry like Fathers in the Field, and I want to amplify this one step further, and I want to add to the vulnerable to another aspect of why it is ministering to the widows and the fatherless, along with others we're going to look at, has such an important aspect of our faith. And what I want to do now is go to the end of Matthew, where Jesus is speaking about Judgment Day, which we will all stand before the Lord on Judgment Day. And look at his words and what he says there. He says, "When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand. Then the king will say to those at his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me, and I was in prison, and you visited me." Then these righteous ones will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, thirsty and give you something to drink, a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? Or when did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are doing it to me." Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?" And he will answer, "I tell you the truth. When you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go away into eternal life." So here's the question. What do all of these people have in common? The hungry, the thirsty, the strangers, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, and we can add to that list what we're talking about today, the widows and the orphans. One of those that we could say, and Michael, you brought out a great point, is they're all vulnerable. But there's another point. And this is the point that we look at our own hearts. What can the hungry, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, the orphan, or the widow do for you? They can't do anything for you. So our ministry comes out of a heart of gratitude to God to minister to those that can't do anything for us. We live in a world that we always want to get something out of it. And there's nothing to get out of this. Well, there is. We're going to talk about that shortly. But here's the point. When we do our party clubs and our adventure clubs to the church, and we reach out to the children in our community and those that come, you know they never put money in the offering plate. They've never given money. Well, they give it to the missionary in the summer when we do adventure club. They can't do anything for me or the leaders that are leading them. It's a pure act of ministry out of our love for God, because God loves those people. I want to emphasize what he says here. The least of these, my brothers and sisters. Again, I want to go back to the concept of family. You see, it's more than just giving somebody a drink. It's more than just going and seeing them into prison or the hospital. It's about loving them as family and inviting them in to be a part of the bigger family. That's why I love the Fathers in the Field ministry, because we aren't just doing a 1-hour Bible club every few months for a boy or a girl that doesn't have a father. We are investing our lives into them. And that's why our pure religion flows. You see, we are acting out the example of our Heavenly Father. When Jesus came and died for us on the cross, what did we have to offer him? What did you give to God? Got it? You've given anything to God yet? No. It was a pure act of love on the part of God to do that for you and me, to adopt us into his family and make us his children. See, that's why ministry that has no return for us is so important in the world. Because the world sees that and they see something different. Our fasting focus for the last year has been that we would be a light for our community. I don't think Michael's phone call to me, by the way, he called me while I was in jail, and his call to me was an accident. I think this is a vital way for us to be a light in our community. And I want to say what Michael's saying, and I want to encourage you all to stay for lunch in his presentation because it involves all of us. It's a church ministry. You may not be a mentor father. Women, sorry, you can't mentor the boys. But you could be involved. And one of the things that I've thought about, and I don't know who it started or where it's out there, but what about all the little girls? All the little girls that have daddy issues. It is a vulnerable thing in our world. I shared this with Michael, but I shared this with a book that I read a few years ago about trauma and the inability to handle trauma. And it starts at a very early age where there's not a safe environment that a child grows up in where they have someone to protect them from their vulnerability. The author of the book says the answer to all the problems in America and around the world is in the home. We'd empty out the prisons, we'd empty out all the rehabs, we would empty out all the divorces and all the other things. Almost all of that comes from fatherlessness. I've shared this before with you when I was a chaplain at the jail. We would give out Mother's Day cards and Father's Day cards. And it was evident even in our jail when we did it. There was a story about a prison in Kansas, and I don't know which one it was, where Hallmark donated enough cards to give a Mother's Day card for every inmate. And they ran out of cards. They decided they wanted to make sure they covered their bases for Father's Day, and they sent an overabundance of cards for Father's Day. You know how many cards were taken? 0. That's my experience in the jail. Almost every man I minister to in the jail has not had a father figure in their lives. See, I believe that what we're starting here can make an impact. And it's only going to be a few boys that we can impact. But there are a few that matter, aren't they? They're important. And we want to do that. But see, what it entails is an investment. The Bible says God loves a cheerful giver. Now, in that passage, he's speaking about money, but I think it extends out to all areas of our lives, including our time and our resources. This is an investment. Those of you men that will step up to be mentors, it's going to be pretty much every Saturday of your life for a few years. Well, take that back. 2 Saturdays a month and a Sunday bringing a boy to church. But I can tell you from the 2 videos we watched a couple of weeks ago, those of you that saw the videos, Did those guys feel like it was a burden that mentored those boys? I heard from their testimony that they were some of the greatest days of their lives. And they didn't stop at 3-year commitment. They extended that out to where even now as adults they're ministering and they're friends with those boys. And guess what? Those boys are now giving back. But you never go in with that attitude. Yes, God does work in people's lives and they are raised up to become God-fearing, wonderful men. There's no guarantee of that. But see, we are to be cheerful givers in all of that. And ministry on every level should never be a burden. My prayer every day is I thank God that God allows me to be a minister, to be a pastor. I think it's a great privilege to shepherd this flock. I consider it a great privilege to be able to go in the jail every week and minister to those men. I count it a great privilege when I'm called into the hospital to minister to people who's lost a loved one. Those are privileged times that I look at that are not a burden. And God's called us all to ministry. And we are to do it cheerfully because of what Christ did for us. I want to close with one more verse. And this is our example in Jesus, found in Hebrews 12, where it talks about him. Because of the joy awaiting him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame. Now he is seated in the place of honor beside God's throne. I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to imagine when Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, he was full of joy. But he was. It was his privilege to endure the cross and die for us. He is our example. And pure religion is acting like him and is selflessly giving ourselves away. And this is one ministry. There are many others, but this is one ministry where we can do that. We can give our lives away. So I'm going to close with challenging your hearts as we come to communion. Do we really love all people? Or just those that can do something for us? Do we count it a joy when we get an opportunity to serve? Or do we consider it a burden? Do we minister to others with no expectations of their ability to give back to us? See, these are heart questions that we need to look at ourselves and determine where we are. And I want to ask you to just spend some time in prayer. And I know we have visitors this morning, and I want to invite you. This is the Lord's table. We take communion every week in our church. And we do that because Jesus commanded us that when we gather, we remember what he did for us. Why can we give and give and give without any expectation in return? Because of what Jesus did for us and the reward that awaits us in heaven. See, that is one of the incentives of living the Christian life. Is we aren't looking at what we can get out of this world. We're looking at the next world where we will stand before the Lord. So I want to just ask you to spend a little bit of time in prayer. And when you're through praying, come up and get communion, and we'll take it together as a group in just a minute. In defense of many churches that don't do communion every week, one of the excuses they use is that it can become ritual and just mundane. And that again, when you look at that, it can be that religious practice that God condemned in the Old Testament. A lot of people are cautious about taking communion because they feel like that something in their life isn't just right. I had an individual come and he was angry and he didn't want to take communion until he got right. And I said, that's the reason we take communion, to get us right. But again, like what James says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this. It's what we do when we walk out of this room. The actions of our lives and the way we live that show us that we belong to Christ. And I think that's what it means to be a light and salt in the world. And this is one great example that we're looking at today with Fathers in the Field. There are many ways that we need to be a light to our community, but this is one of them. And I'm excited about partnering with this ministry to be able to do that. But we do it because we are living the example and for what Jesus has done for us. And he was much more than just an example. He was our atonement. And that's why we do communion every week, to remind us that we can't do this on our own. We need Jesus every second of every day as we live our lives here. And the only way we can be God's children is through his death. So we're reminded of that every week. Jesus said to do it. He said, when you take the bread, remember my body that died on the cross for you, for the forgiveness of sins. Let's eat. And when you take the cup, we are to remember the cup of the new covenant, which doesn't just save us, but we're adopted. We are children of God. What an awesome thing to be God's child. Let's drink. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for sending your Son to be the Savior of the world. Thank you that you love us so much that you've adopted us as your children through the blood of Christ. And Lord, may we be living examples of your love for us as we love others, the vulnerable, those who can't do anything for us. Help us to be a light to them in our community. Help us to minister to them. I pray right now as we begin Fathers in the Field ministry here in the church, that, Lord, you would bring the right men to be mentors, that the right women that will help and support this ministry, and for the single moms and the boys that will be a part of this ministry, that we will be able to gain their trust and they will entrust their sons to us, that we can be a difference in their lives. And Lord, we're just walking in obedience, expecting you to accomplish your results. But help us to be obedient as your children and to joyfully serve you in every way that you've given us to serve because of what you've done for us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So before we close, we're having carnitas for lunch, which is pork, tacos, and there's plenty. And I encourage all of you to stay. Probably none of you, or a lot of you, did not have plans to do this. But I would love for you to learn more about this ministry, because this is an us ministry. This is what we will be doing as a church. And I think it's important to just kind of understand what it is You're not obligated to join the ministry, but Michael's going to be sharing right after lunch and giving a presentation to give us a good overview of the ministry. So I encourage you to stay and learn more about this ministry. Let's close with our benediction, if you would stand. It's found in Isaiah 53, one of my favorite passages in all the Bible. It was the Lord's good plan to crush him and cause him grief. Yet when his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. God bless you, and hope you will stay for lunch.